scream. But there's something peculiar about them. It has this quite noticeable static sound every time someone screams, or should I say, whenever a scream plays. It sounds like it's coming out of a siren, and it wakes me up every night. I've learned to ignore it, and I've thought it's probably me imagining things, since I didn't like sirens that much as a kid either. Too loud to be enjoyable. It wakes me up every night, and it sounds very realistic, so I thought I should ask the headmaster if our sirens accidentally play those weird sounds at night. Next morning I talked to him about it, and he said that it may have been an error, but even if it was the sirens were turned off at night, only the alarms ones were on. I tried to get him to look deeper into this thing, because I doubt it was just an error, and I was sure it was coming from a siren, but he said he thinks I'm talking nonsense and sent me to do some exercises with some other soldiers. He might have been right. I maybe was just a bit paranoid. This night, the sounds weren't that loud. It sounded as if it was playing from somewhere inside the forest. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight, a shotgun, and sneaked out of camp to go into the forest and investigate. I know I may sound like an idiot for doing this, like going out of camp to go check it out, but those screams were making my sanity fall apart. I kept walking and walking. Nothing was found, but I could hear the screams getting louder. I'm sure I was approaching it. I ended up in a straight dirt road, and then I saw something. It was too dark to see, but I could see something really freaky in the dark. It was in the middle of the road, so I pointed my flashlight at it. A slim monster that was as tall as a tree, having long arms that could reach its toes, and for a head, 2 sirens connected into a tube. It looked very skinny, as if it was only bones, but you could clearly see some flesh on it, and it had metallic wires through its body. I was terrified, but without any second thoughts, I immediately held my gun and shot it. It didn't die. The bullet marks were clear and I could see some blood running down, but instead of showing signs of pain, it started walking towards me. Without any second thoughts, I ran the opposite direction from where I was facing. The siren mimicked my scream and played it again. This static sound always gives me a sick feeling in my stomach, but from close up, it was more terrifying. It then started to play some other weird sounds coming from its sirens, such as tornado warnings, Amber Alert announcements, and general announcers speaking about scary things such as murders, criminal escapes, and other messed up stuff. I could run really fast, but even though it was walking, it wasn't that far away from me. Let's say I was far enough for it to not catch me. I grabbed my gun again, stopped, and shot a siren. The sound it was playing were glitched out. I managed to outrun it, but it started approaching me pretty quick. I was far enough, but I could still see it in the dark. I was running for about half an hour, felt more like an eternity. Our distance didn't even change by a centimeter. It felt like I was running on an infinite road. Luckily, I could see a car, thought someone was there. Whoever it was, I needed them to get away from that thing. But to my disappointment, it was locked. Big mistake stopping. The monster was now a bit closer and the road got really muddy, so it slowed me down. I got out of the road and got inside the forest. It didn't come in. I could see it facing me, but it stopped moving. I saw my camp. I was relieved, but still scared to stop and relax. I asked the guards to let me in, and since they know me, they obviously opened the door. They asked me what I was doing outside this late. And how did I get out? I apologized and asked them to keep it a secret, but I later explained to them what I saw and how I left. They probably felt sorry for me and thought I was being paranoid, so they told me to go get some rest. I swore to them I didn't lie for what I had seen. They still didn't believe me. I shrugged it off and went back to my bed. That night I was so terrified. It was the scariest experience I've ever had. I don't know why I'm writing this, but I feel like I just have to. No one believes me anyway, so maybe putting my story down on paper will help me in some fashion. I don't even know where I should begin. I guess I'll give some context. My family has owned a lake house for generations, and I'm talking about for at least 100 years of my family's history can be tied back to this place. The weird part to me, however, is that this was the only house on the lake, but the fact that we never used it was even weirder to me growing up. This fact changed in 2008 during the Great Recession. Times were rough. Both my parents were laid off, leaving us struggling in all financial aspects. So much so that my family had no other choice but to bounce house from the house. Until finally, my dad made the decision to move into the old lake house. This was the first time my older brother and I have even heard of the lake house in our lives. Confused and upset that we would be moving once again, we asked why this is the first time we've ever heard of this house. This question was dodged each and every time we asked. Eventually, we just gave up. Our time there wasn't long, nor was it all that memorable. The only things I did remember from that place was the constant nagging from our parents to stay out of the woods, and every now and then late at night, I would hear these annoying sirens blasting through the woods. The weirdest part about these sirens is that it was never the same sound. The howling would change each and every time with no real explanation. I remember asking my family about it, and the only real answer I got was that there was a military base nearby, and it was probably just coming from that. Being only 11, I just took that at its face value and let it be. Other than that, there was nothing of note in that short year span we spent in that location. My dad was luckily able to find a new job, and we moved out almost immediately as he got hired. Fast forward 11 years, I had just graduated college and was feeling good. I wanted to celebrate, maybe take a trip, but knowing how broke my buddies and I were, I knew that was a no-go. So after a quick group meeting, we decided that the old lake house should be the location for our last college weekend bender. It did take a lot, and I mean a lot of convincing to get my parents to agree, but they let my older brother use the lake house when he graduated, so I was able to twist their arm with that. I was pumped. This was our last hurrah together, and we were planning on making the most of it. Granted, the almost daily reminders from my parents to stay out of the woods was a little bit of a buzzkill, but we had no plans at the time to even go into the woods. We had all the booze we needed to make sure that all 5 of us had no reason to leave the house or private beach, which went off without a hitch on the first night and well into the next morning. We were well into our second night of the binge. We had started a fire out in the back and were happily reminiscing about our early years in college. This was interrupted, however, by the blaring sounds of a siren that were coming from deep within the forest nearby. I tried to explain that it was just a military base nearby, but after a quick search online, my buddies showed me that there was no such base. Confused and curious about this siren, I was easily convinced to go with them to check it out. I did tell them that my parents were insistent on us not going in the woods, but this only slowed us down for a bit. We convinced each other that they were just worried about wild animals. We all grabbed something to defend ourselves in case an animal did decide to attack. I managed to find my dad's rifle he kept in the house. I wasn't even sure if this thing would even fire. It hadn't been taken care of or cleaned in over a decade. We then set out with our makeshift arsenal and our phones, which we used for our flashlights. We walked for what seemed to be forever, following the sound of the siren that at times felt as if it was moving away from us. Blindly, we followed it until about an hour in, while annoyed and tired, decided to give up. But almost as soon as we turned around, the siren stopped. All that was left was the eerie, oh so eerie silence. I mean, there was nothing, no crickets, No normal wildlife sounds at all. Only the sounds of our breaths and our footsteps filled our ears. The silence got to us, causing us to just ramble on about pointless subjects on our way back. Randomly, almost as if a switch flipped on, the sounds of wildlife filled the area. However, something seemed off. It seemed to be too loud, as if they were amplified, and they all seemed to be coming from the same direction as the siren was originating. All of us were more than just uneasy and felt the need to run. A couple of guys tried to make a joke and laugh at the uneasiness, but the air still seemed to be heavy around us. We must have been jogging for about 5 minutes before a deafening no. A crippling siren started to blast, but this time the sound was coming from in front of us. We stopped dead in our tracks. I remember the next part clearly, as if I was still in the moment. My buddies were all shouting. At least I can only assume that was the case based on their motions and the way their mouths were moving, but I heard nothing but the siren. One of my buddies was on one knee, hands covering his ears. I moved to help him back up so that we could continue our way back to the house, but as I took a step closer, a giant metallic, fleshy claws that seemed to come from the top trees plucked him up like he was nothing. Frozen in disbelief, it took all my courage to look up. Oh God, how I wish I didn't look up. My eyes were met with a demonic-like creature that stood about 40 feet in the air. Its body looked as if it was a mesh of wood, flesh, and metal that was molded together by the devil himself. Its head, if you could call it that, consisted of 2 sirens that looked beaten down and worn out. The worst part of it all was what was inside of the sirens themselves, sharp-pointed yellow teeth frozen in a terrifying smile. I was frozen, helpless, as I watched my friend being lifted into this creature's mouth. The teeth slowly began to pry open as a long, girthy tongue slowly wrapped around his body. The tongue then began to retract, pulling him closer and closer. For a brief moment, the siren had stopped, allowing us to hear his screams and his cries for help. It was as if this creature wanted us to hear them. I was also able to hear one of my friends scream for me to shoot the beast as he ran up to what I believe was the leg of it. I came to my senses and aimed the gun at the beast and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit it, making a sound that I can't even describe to this day. A spurt of blood seemed to pop out of the monster, but it remained unfazed as it swallowed my friend whole. I then heard a long metallic clang. The sound came from an axe being struck against this thing's leg. My buddy who had struck the creature had his arms fling back with almost no damage seen on the leg. The beast moved its foot, flinging my friend across the forest, smacking a tree. His back gave in and his body contorted around the tree like a slap rap on a forearm. The silence was soon destroyed, not by a siren this time, but by the sounds of screams. The screams were a jumbled mess of both men and women. I panicked. I dropped my gun and ran. I didn't look back, I just bolted. I don't know if my buddies followed me, and at the time I did not care. I just wanted to get out alive. I ran and ran, but the sounds of the screams followed me relentlessly. Somehow we reached the lake house, but we left immediately. What happened there gave me nightmares for years. I was lucky to survive and will never go into the woods.
Last night I was playing in our backyard, surrounded by thick woods that connected to the nearby forest. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. My dad always kept our dog Tommy inside when it got dark, but I was a careless kid who never listened. As I tossed the ball into the fading light, the atmosphere felt unsettling. Howls echoed in the distance, blending with the chirps of crickets and the occasional roar of wild animals. I was caught up in the fun, but Tommy seemed uneasy. He kept glancing toward the woods, his ears perked, as if sensing something lurking just beyond the trees. Accidentally, I threw the ball too far, sending it deep into the woods. "Go get it, Tommy!" I shouted, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. He bolted after it, but halted at the edge of the woods, looking back at me with wide, fearful eyes. My heart raced, and curiosity got the better of me. "It's not far," I urged, trying to sound brave. Tommy hesitated, then stepped into the shadows of the trees. Moments later, he vanished from sight. I pulled out my phone, checking notifications and scrolling through YouTube shorts to pass the time, dismissing the nagging worry in the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, a howl pierced the air, deep, resonant, and terrifying. My heart dropped. "Tommy, where are you?" I called, my voice trembling. Silence enveloped me, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. Panic surged as I shouted his name, but there was no response. I decided I had to search for him. Stepping cautiously onto the path he had taken, the chill in the air felt like an invisible hand gripping my spine. The wind carried an unsettling weight, rustling the branches ominously. As I pushed through some thick bushes, I heard it, a low growl reverberating through the darkness. "Tommy, is that you?" I shouted, desperately hoping for a familiar bark. A shadow leaped from behind the bushes and vanished behind a massive tree. My heart raced faster than my feet as I strained to see what it was. Just then, I heard Tommy barking frantically from the spot where the creature had disappeared. When I finally reached him, he was trembling and darted toward me, his body shaking like a leaf. I glanced back, and there it was. A hulking figure, nearly 8 feet tall, with glowing red eyes peering at us from behind the tree. My breath hitched in my throat as I noticed its massive, hairy tail swinging ominously in the air. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the woods, sending shivers down my spine. Without a second thought, I sprinted back to the house, with Tommy close behind me. We bolted through the back door, locking it with shaking hands. I peeked through the window, heart pounding, and saw the creature standing on 2 legs just outside the reach of the porch light. It stood there watching before disappearing into the darkness of the woods. That night, fear gripped me as I sat on the floor of my bedroom, clutching Tommy tightly. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse with menace, and every creak of the house felt amplified. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the memory of those glowing red eyes haunted me. As days passed, I noticed strange things around the house. My dad's tools were scattered in odd places, and the garbage cans had been tipped over. I found deep claw marks on the tree near our yard, and the howling continued each night, echoing through the darkness. I could hear the creature's heavy breath and feel its presence lurking just beyond the trees. Tommy had become increasingly anxious, often growling at the slightest sound. I tried to keep him close, but my mind was a whirlpool of fear and guilt for having let him out that night. I knew I had to tell someone, but I couldn't bring myself to share the truth. What if my dad found out? I could only imagine the disappointment in his eyes. One afternoon, I gathered enough courage to explore the woods again. The sun was high, casting a golden hue over everything, but the memory of that night lingered like a shadow. Tommy stayed close by my side, still apprehensive, his ears perked at every rustle. I ventured further into the woods than I had before, convinced that understanding the area might lessen my fear. As I walked, the underbrush thickened, and the air turned cool and damp. I stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin, partially hidden by overgrown foliage. Its door hung ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Something inside me urged me to explore, but the memory of that creature's roar held me back. I took a deep breath, the fear battling with an overwhelming curiosity. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. Dust danced in the sunlight streaming through cracked windows. The interior was filled with remnants of a forgotten past, faded photographs, tattered furniture, and the lingering scent of decay. As I explored, I found a strange symbol carved into the wooden floor, resembling a circle with claw marks radiating from it. A chill ran down my spine. It felt ominous, like a warning. As night fell, I hurried back home, the woods behind me darkening into a tangled mass of shadows. Tommy whined softly, sensing the tension in the air. That night, the howls grew louder, mingling with a sound I had not heard before, a mournful, almost human-like cry that pierced through the night, sending shivers down my spine. Sleep eluded me, and I lay wide awake, listening to the ominous symphony of the night. Tommy curled up next to me, but even he seemed restless, his body tense and alert. The howls intensified, echoing around the house as if the creature was closing in. Then the sounds stopped. An eerie silence blanketed everything. My heart raced. Something was wrong. I glanced at Tommy, who was standing rigid, staring toward the window. I followed his gaze and froze. There in the darkness, I saw the outline of the creature again. It was closer this time, its red eyes burning like embers against the night. Fear surged through me as I whispered, "What do you want?" But the creature remained still, observing us, its breath heavy and deliberate. Suddenly it turned and bolted into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I felt a mix of terror and relief wash over me, but deep down I knew it wouldn't stop. The creature was toying with us, and I needed to understand what it was and why it haunted our home. I resolved to uncover the truth. The next day I gathered the courage to return to the cabin, but my heart felt heavy. Tommy remained outside, a silent sentinel as I entered. I scoured the place, searching for clues about the creature. In the back room I found an old journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was filled with ramblings about the woods, strange rituals, and sightings of a beast that roamed the night. My hands trembled as I read about a legend, a creature that was once a man, cursed by the forest for his sins. The more he hunted, the more he became something monstrous, forever trapped in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no mere tale. It felt real, and I was caught in the middle of it. Suddenly, the journal fell open to a page with a map. Marked were several locations around the woods, including a spot labeled Cursed Grove. I felt a pull toward it, an urge to confront whatever lay there. I had to see it for myself. As dusk approached, I made my way to the grove, Tommy by my side. The air grew colder, and a thick fog rolled in, wrapping around us like a shroud. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to close in, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. Finally, I reached a clearing, and what I found made my blood run cold. In the center lay remnants of old totems, surrounded by markings similar to those in the cabin. The ground was disturbed, as if something had recently broken through. My heart raced as I realized this was the heart of the creature's territory. As night fell, I felt a shift in the air. The howling returned, louder and more feral than before. I turned to leave, but before I could react, a figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette against the moonlight. It was the creature, towering and more terrifying than I had imagined, with eyes that glowed like burning coals. "Leave this place," it growled, the sound echoing through the grove. I stumbled back, my voice caught in my throat. Tommy barked, and I felt a surge of courage. "What do you want?" I shouted, desperation flooding my words. "Why are you tormenting us?" The creature took a step forward, its gaze piercing into my soul. "You trespassed into my domain. The woods remember, and the curse binds me here." Before I could respond, the creature lunged and instinct took over. I turned to run, dragging Tommy along as the forest closed in behind us. We sprinted through the trees, branches scratching at my arms, the howls echoing like a cacophony. We reached home and locked all the doors. I told my dad everything, and surprisingly, he believed us. He said, "If he returns, we have to leave this place." When the sun came up, we immediately left.